you're going to get them attacked. You're not going to clear the mines. You may result in the Iranian side putting more mines in there. Because if you shut it off and say nobody's coming in, they may say, fair enough, nobody's coming in or out now. And then now it's going to be a panic in the Gulf. Because already, I showed you that chart yesterday, there's huge amounts of oil that's been already stopped up. So that means that their income is cut. And they're struggling either. They need all kinds of things. Other kinds of goods and requirements for their survival as a nation. They need to depend upon that traffic coming in. Out. The stops all of it. Now, where is this going to go? In the near term, I mean, we have the Iranian side saying, yeah, they're ready to go. They were prepared. Yep, now they're not going to continue additional information because the U.S. and China's taking more action in the Iranian war, including shoulder-fired missiles. China's secretly taking an active stance in the war. Chemical fuel components that can be used in dual purpose for war. So what do you think they're going to do if you start attacking in China, if you start attacking ships on the open waters that are bringing goods or oil to them? Probably not going to go very well. So this could be escalated in nearly any way you can look at it. This is the worst thing the U.S. could have done. It can't be surprising to anybody, but this is not going to end well. Let me just categorically state this will not cause the Iranian side to capitulate. They're just not going to do it. It's not in their DNA. And they almost certainly foresaw this and maybe doing something that would escalate this. Because I think they know that militarily we can't suffer more than they can. That's the problem. Well, we're going to find out. Well, listen, we appreciate you guys on a Sunday morning here, but I didn't want to let you go without at least giving you an update on this breaking news here. We're going to continue to follow the Daniel Davis Deep Dive. Anything further, kind of to bring it to you. Till then, we'll see you next time.
¿Serio? Dios. Acabo de poner ahí, señoras y señores.
There is a process in engineering called reverse engineering. It's used when you dismantle, deconstruct a product in order to know its information and how it got to be where it was when you saw it last. So before coming here today, and telling you how I redesigned my life, I had to deconstruct the past 15 years of my life to show you the process that I had to go through to get to where I am today, standing in front of you all. When we were young, growing up, okay, you're not supposed to laugh at that picture, you guys. We were told to have a good life and be successful. We had to be going through a certain path. To be successful, we needed to go to school and get a good job, win a fantastic husband, have children, raise them same way as we were raised for them to be successful, then retire, and then spend whatever years we have left on this earth taking care of our grandchildren. Now, I started the journey on the right track. I was always at the top in my class. I received a a scholarship. I was lucky enough to get a scholarship and go off to a great university. Graduated as an architectural engineer,
Ah, la
secured a
miércoles.
government job, married a very understanding, handsome guy, had raised 3 children, wonderful children, and my daughter brought the fourth one into the family. Now you would say I was off to a great start, right? Until 15 years ago, when my journey had a twist in it. The cliche happy life and success suddenly took another turn. I was turned down to be a CEO of the organization I was in at the time because of my gender, because I was a woman, or I am a woman. They wanted a man. So I decided, you know what? It was time to leave the corporate life and see what life had arranged for me going forward. I was 47 and I was lost. Looking back, I believe that the turning point was when I started redesigning my life, although I didn't know it then. That was the turning point. In my own eyes, I was a failure, thinking that to be successful and have a good life and be happy, I needed to prove to myself and to everyone around me that I was good enough to make it as a CEO. My pursuit of a new job started then because I believed I had to get a job to have an identity, that the job was my identity. I thought that because I had not made it to the top level in the corporate world, I still had to prove to everyone that I was worthy of making it to the top. There was something unfinished. On the other hand, I wasn't getting employed now because guess what? I was overqualified. And I couldn't just sit alone and do nothing. So I went back to school. I got my first master's degree. I waited 2 years. Now I was overqualified and I had a lot of degrees. What can I do? Okay, I'll go in and get another degree. I got my second master's degree. It was halfway through the second master's degree that I got the chance to get into a PhD journey. And then I dove in. Now, on the other side of the story, what was happening in the community? When I started studying again, society was like, Leish, why? You know, you have a good husband, you have a good life, you have great children. Why do you want to go back to school? Just relax and enjoy life. But what about me? I was asking them. That's it? That's not what I want. Okay? That was the first shift in my journey. What other people think that I should be doing in my life is not in their hands, it's in my own hands. And believe me, my children were the ones who made me realize that. But still, I was a failure in my own eyes. Okay? I had to prove to everyone that I had to have a C-suite position. And that being part of a corporation was what gave me identity. I was still looking for that identity. So I was deeply now drowned in my research. And it's a very lonely phase. Okay? And one becomes isolated with the research and with their own thoughts. It was in this isolation that I started wondering what was I really looking for? What would give meaning to my life and make me happy or happier? The seeking of meaning in life led me to dive into how our thoughts make us trigger feelings inside of us and then become these individuals who think the whole world is against them or become a better version of themselves. Now that was 12 years ago, and I started redesigning my life and how I wanted, not the society, how to live going forward. It was a design that incorporated a lot of work, okay? The fields of mental and physical body had to come together, okay? Mental by working on my thoughts, and physical by working on my body to become fit, because I started reading, listening to podcasts, and learning from others and from the researchers how they did it so that I would know how to do it myself. But reading alone doesn't get you there, right? Action does. Atomic Habits by James Clear says to stop paying so much attention to your goals and start working on the systems, on the habits that you have to do every day in order for you to get there. Be mindful of your systems or habits and put them in order, acting upon them. I ask myself, what is the life that I want to look forward to? Is it one with fame, money, and status, or one full of enjoyment, satisfaction, and joy, and purpose? So I needed to understand those terms. It's nice to read them, it's nice to see them out there, but you have to understand them and how to get there. What is the meaning of life? What is the bigger purpose or picture? Why did God create me? I came across a positive psychology literature with the notion that if you can make a connection between three things and make it a coherent story, you will get to what meaning in life is. The increase in meaning comes from connecting three things. What is your theory of work? And by that, we don't say not the job you want, but why do you work? What is it for? What is work in service of? The first thing that kept coming back again and again was that, okay, my life on this earth is shorter than what I had already accumulated so far. I knew that longevity needs a sound mind and a healthy body. I started researching, reading, attending workshops on ways to calm my thoughts, while at the same time working on my body and started an exercise routine. Exercise became a routine. It was in my daily life and not a seasonal option where we just want to lose a few kilos because we have this wedding coming up. We have to get fit so we can do vulnerability, and how vulnerability is beautiful, and that we are enough as we are. And I don't need to get that C-suite job that I was looking for all this time. I was enough. On the upper branch of the 70s going towards the end. Adding my experience to it, which makes it a lot more. The most important relationship in life is the one you have
With yourself.
When you
I agree.
life work for it by learning about it, apply it, practice it in
¿Qué
your
te
life.
pasa?
You cannot
¿Qué te
learn
parece,
something just
13? ¿Qué te
reading a book
parece?
or
Horrible,
listening to a
pero bueno,
podcast or an interview
es lo que sale.
or seeing it a glimpse to it and you don't.
Que no lo vea una verdadera Twitter
Stop
porque
paying so much
estamos en el
attention
horno.
to goals. Start paying attention to the habits, to the systems. Be more mindful of your systems and put priorities in order, your priorities. Then when you get it, share it with everyone else. I want to engage more and more with conversation with the community around me to believe that working on their mental and physical health is the thing that will get them gracefully and being at the same time fit. I want you to believe that we are all work in progress all the time, and that happiness, happierness, as Oprah Winfrey coined it, when you get to your 70s.
He was waiting for me to get done so that we could go play, and I'm fussing around, and he says, Grandma, what are you doing? I said, I'm putting on makeup, honey. It makes my face look better. And we keep working it, and he keeps looking at me for about 30 more seconds, and he says, Grandma, when does it start working? Go away. So I threw the makeup in the bag. I said, you know what, you're right, honey. Let's go. was my mommy credentials. I had a daughter who was 1 year younger than me at the time. This mother, she's walking around like this and she's holding up this picture. She's saying, this is what my Joey looked like. This is what my Joey looked like before that dog bit him. And when I rounded the corner and went into his hospital room, I understood why she was doing that. He looked like a little mermaid. His face was completely... My favorite, we were an exchange actually with doesn't all this hateful response bother you? And at first I used to say, no, it doesn't bother me. Well, there were two things wrong with that answer. First of all, it wasn't true. It did bother me. I mean, even went after my pug, and how hard is the life of a pug to begin with? So it wasn't true. The truth was, yes, it often bothered me, but I didn't let it stop me. But the other thing that was even more important, I realized, is if I tried to hold myself up as somebody who wasn't affected by any of this, how was I ever going to hope to encourage any other women to speak their minds? I wanted them to know. I wanted to close that distance so fast that it helps them understand. I'm just like you. I wasn't able to do this. And shortly after I started writing the column, kept his name. Everybody seemed fine with that until he decided to run for the Senate in 2006. And suddenly, total strangers. The last weeks of my mother's life, as I said, she died. Is one thing. What you answer to is something else. I am so lucky. All of my adult life, I have had women in my life who not only believe it is important never for us to be invisible at any age, but who support other women, including me. Boxes that you hanging on my kitchen door. 62, she became vice president. At age 62, she became dean of Amnesty Chapel, downtown here at UCC headquarters. When I think of Kate, I think of how often she has insisted on introducing me to my higher angels. And then, I feel emotional to see her face because I know she's in the audience today. This is Sue Klein. I have known Sue Klein for so many years. For 29 and a half years, she worked for the same company. She was one of those secretaries who didn't fit the title because most people just referred to her as the boss of them. And when she was almost 50, she decided that she wanted to try something different. She wanted a different kind of job. And her boss essentially told her, who's going to hire you? The United States Senator. That's who. And she's wearing that shirt because that was the Cavs parade day she was going. She has, for the first time in her life, she has her own business cards. And she's not a secretary anymore. I interviewed Jane Goldman a couple of years ago when her new book came out about what comes next in middle age, and she said that by 2014, the youngest baby boomers will have turned 50. And the question we face is, what am I going to do?
Baby
Each of us
boomer.
faces this question. What am I going to do for the next 40 years? Speaking of menopausal whales, I love that. Did you know that the killer whale is the only other mammal that goes through menopause? And did you know that after menopause, she becomes the leader of the clan? And she lives for 20, 30, 40 years as the boss of everybody. You know what? We could have a postmenopausal woman be president of the United States. Oh, there I am. Tired, mommy Connie, holding my 10-month-old baby, Caitlin, on deadline. As you can see, the shower was yet to come. If I could talk to her, if I could reach back in time and talk to Connie, I would tell her 3 things. Number 1, get rid of the glasses. Number 2, you've got time. You got time. You got time to do all the things you want to do. It isn't going to come to an end at 35, at 45, at 55. So don't listen to that hype. As long as you wake up every morning with a renewed sense of curiosity, and you've got your own tribe of champions, men and women, you're going to be fine. You're going to get to do all you want to do, just not at the same time. And as long as you don't listen to that voice of no in your head, you're going to surprise yourself. The last thing I would want to say to her is, do not wait to be invited to make a difference in the world. I'm reminded of a dear friend who was an assistant editor at the Plain Dealer, and one morning I walked in and I could tell she was so upset. She's standing there and she's just stewing. And I walked up to her and I said, what's the matter? And she pointed to a group of her male colleagues huddled in a corner, and she said, I'm trying to figure out why I'm not included in that conversation. And I put my hand on her back and said as gently as I could, I'm trying to figure out why you're waiting for the invitation. If women waited for the invitation, we still wouldn't have the right to vote. Remember Karen Sandstrom I told you about, the artist? This is my favorite piece of hers so far. She calls it Night Sky. I call it the monster under the bed. I love how the little boys invited him up to sit with them so they could become friends. I have figured out who that monster has been in my life. It's that voice of no. It's the one that says, who are you to think you're going to be able to be a columnist? Why would anyone care what you have to say? So this hangs over my desk. And now sometimes when I'm feeling a little nervous because I'm finishing my first novel, I pull up an empty chair and I invite him to sit down. The understanding is going to keep his negative viewpoints to himself. If I hear anything in my head, I immediately turn to that empty chair and say, what did I tell you? Nothing. Not a word. Because I'm going to turn 60 next year, you understand? And I've got plans.
Miércoles.
And if anyone stands in front of me and thinks he's going to see right through me, I'm going to stop him in his tracks. I'm going to hold up my pretty fingernails. And I'm going to say, this, sir, is your new reality.
Has a different meaning than if that question were asked before World War II. Reasons and to choice. I want to emphasize the power of choice. And perhaps there was a time when we wouldn't even talk about it, but we have to talk about that today. Because choice is a fundamental power of the human experience. We need
Gorgeous.
to put
I love
choice
it.
as an authority, as a power that is so huge that if I ran the world, this is where you should say, that's a good idea, but if I ran the world, I would make studying the power of choice part of every school curriculum. That everyone should learn that the power of the choices you make have infinite consequences. From the littlest choice to something that is great, big, huge. And that here's the paradox. You have no idea what a little choice is or a big choice. What we are used to doing is believing that a big choice is an obvious one. Buying a house, getting married, getting divorced. In fact, those are your small choices. The choices that actually matter when it comes to your health, when it comes to healing, when it comes to positioning yourself, empowering yourself, are the tiny ones that are the choices, I should say, that you think have the least power, most insignificant, I have found repeatedly, are the most powerful choices of your life. The most powerful. That have the most powerful impact on your biology, on your on your soul, on
Exacto.
your sense of who you are, on your well-being, on your whole
Existencia.
life map. Now, I'll tell you something else, that these are the types of statements that are dicey to make, because if someone said, I want you to bring proof of this in a basket, I couldn't do it. But if you listen with your heart and your gut and see if it doesn't settle well there like good chicken soup. So I'm going to take you through choices. The kind of choices that if you came to me and said, I don't feel well. I don't feel well. And I have chronicness. And I go from one chronicness to another. I have chronicnesses. I am always a curmudgeon. Nothing makes me happy. I am always complaining, and I ache, and I'm exhausted. I almost make unexhaustion, but I don't. And I almost like my life, but I actually
¿No
don't.
vas a bailar acá afuera?
And I almost
Hey.
love someone, but not really. I almost make it there, where I actually feel love, but I don't actually really feel it. I think I feel it, so I think feel. And every now and again I kind of get a love high, but it doesn't last. I take 2 aspirins, it passes. But then I think maybe it is, but then it's not. But then it is, but it almost is, but not quite. So I go to a therapist. Is this love? But if I try hard enough, but maybe. So I find someone to blame. Chronicness. There's never been people like us who have these issues. We're extraordinary in our issues. And as I go into this, here's another thing that is unique about us. And put this in your chicken soup belly. We are born knowing certain things. We're wired for it. It's in our instinct. It's in our spiritual instincts. It's in our DNA. It's in our soul DNA. We are born knowing that choice is powerful. Choice is the most powerful thing we got going for us, and we know it. And that's the reason why we're terrified to make a choice. I'll ask somebody, where do you want to go for dinner? I don't know. Pick a restaurant? No. Can't even pick a restaurant. People are terrified of making choices. Terrified of the consequence you choose. Terrified of being held accountable for a consequence. Well, I don't know what I want to do. I'll think about it. The morning, the day, your mind gets the day shift, your heart gets the night shift. Your mind says, well, I think, your heart says, I feel. And you don't let the two of them talk to each other. Because if they do, then they actually have to do something. Choice terrifies people. So most people will do anything to postpone making choices. So I'm going to help you out. We're going to go through a list of choices that matter, that make a difference. The first choice is
Iran, India, the Turkish state, Turkey, thanks to its Ottoman heritage, these are core civilizational states in the world. They represent much more than just their own nation state. They represent thousands of years of culture and history. So none of these states under any circumstances are going to surrender their sovereignty. But we need to understand that for Iran, this is existential. Remember what Trump said about this initially. Oh, this is just a journey. This is a journey. In other words, it's not existential for us. You know, a journey in which we've decided that we're going to bring a nation of 93 million people to its knees. We're going to destroy its way of life, its existence. But for us, it's just a journey. Well, why is it just a journey for us? Because it's a journey for Israel. And that's the problem. This is the problem that people don't understand. We cannot solve Israel's strategic problems militarily, which is what we're being asked to do right now. Israel was already widely disliked, if not treated as a threat in the region anyway. Now, the rest of the Islamic world sees Israel as this menace, this virus that is going to ultimately destroy all of them. And all you have to do is look at the map of Greater Israel. The map of Greater Israel includes much of Saudi Arabia, northern Iraq, Syria, Jordan, the Sinai, and some territory west of the Nile, and of course at least half of Lebanon. And all of this is part of so-called Greater Israel. Well, we used to have something during World War II called Greater Germany, Post-Deutschland. You know, this was the expanded Germany. Ultimately, that actually made more sense because at least there were Germans living on the territory. Not always in the majority, but there. In this case, we're talking about all of the populations that have to be subject to the Gaza Strip. They're going to have to be subjugated, enslaved, or rebelled. This is insane. And this is what we are fighting. People need to understand this. I don't see any evidence that it exists.
If they have the ability to control the straits in the future, I think the world will fail, but I don't think Trump's going to.
Dios mío.
The idea that they control the straits in the future
Claro.
has got to be off the table. The idea that they can come back as the largest state sponsor of terrorism has to be off the table. That they can never have a nuke, they can never make missiles to threaten us in the region has to be off the table.
So he's just laid out right there, especially in that last part. Only a regime change is an outcome that he can live with. They can't be in control of the Strait of Hormuz. They can't be allowed to have nuclear material. They can't. All these things. The only way that can be accomplished is if you completely defeat the regime itself, and without a land army to go in and do that, how is that even theoretically possible, Doug?
Well, I think we have to go back and understand something. He has benefited from Israeli largesse in the community here in the United States. He is a strong spokesman for their interests. And back again to the original point. This is the Israeli agenda. Somebody needs to stand up and ask the question, why should this be their agenda? We've traded lies and misrepresentation of events and people for 40 plus years with Iran. Every time the Iranians approached us and hoped to establish some sort of improved relationship, our friends in the Israel lobby and the billionaires that backed them have intervened to stop it. So now they have the war they think they want. The danger, though, is very, very clear. If we were to embark on as this man wants us to, on this total destruction plan, total war against Iran, we are inviting future nuclear strikes against the United States. I think that's what we need to understand. We're not going to be able to strike anybody with impunity. And I think the Chinese and the Russians have made that clear. And I don't see any evidence that they want a war with us. But if they think that Israel is going to employ a nuclear weapon, let alone us, then I think all bets are off. And right now the entire region is turning decisively against us and Israel. Most of the world is. I mean, this nonsense of we're going to fix it all for the world. They don't as a result, Europe is being deindustrialized. The population's living standards are falling. Now, on top of that, with the oil not showing up so that you have virtually no energy, unless you burn coal or you can rapidly restore nuclear power stations. That's happening, by the way, in Japan, and I think also in Korea. Without that sort of thing, you're not going to have any power for a very long time. So you're moving into a global depression. So while Trump thinks this is all about him, he thinks this is about his victory, his need to dominate. Israel lobby and its billionaire supporters. It's not. It's about humanity. It's about the people who live on this planet. And that suffering is far more necessary for his they know? And you can answer your own question. Have you ever run into an Air Force officer that did not believe in his heart of hearts that with enough bombs and enough missiles and enough rockets that the Air Force can't win everything? Have you? I never have. Every Air Force officer I've ever known, that's an article of faith. If you'll just give us all the money, give us all the munitions, all the missiles, all the aircraft we want, we can win any war, anywhere, at any time. I've listened to that for years. So forget the military advice. It's going to be catastrophic. So what does that mean?
Following 6 weeks of warfare. The basis of the negotiations will be a 10-point proposal put forward by Iran, not Trump's vaunted 15-point plan, that includes a call for a cessation of all hostilities in the region, including in Lebanon, where Israel has been carrying out punishing airstrikes, reparations paid to Iran, the release of billions of dollars of frozen Iranian assets, a withdrawal of U.S. military bases in the region, the lifting of all sanctions on Iran, and a permanent and formalized end to hostilities. The agreement calls for the opening of the Strait of Hormuz, through which 20% of the world's daily oil and gas shipments are transited. Iran, however, has so far refused to open the strait, insisting that Israel's attacks in Lebanon must first end, and frozen assets must be released to Iran. While Iran has suffered military assets, including naval and air assets, while it has seen senior leaders, including the Supreme Leader, Trump has, at the same time, caused incalculable damage to America's moral standing by taking part in an unprovoked attack on Iran and openly advocating war crimes, including a call to obliterate Iranian civilization and take out civilian infrastructure, including power plants. He squandered an estimated $39 billion on the war, costs that will be felt at home, especially with rising prices. The global economy remains in crisis, and even if hostilities do not resume, will take months to recover. Iran, most importantly, is now the indisputable master of the strait, charging tankers $2 million to transit through the strait. It has a stranglehold on the global economy. The new Iranian leadership, centered around the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, is more defiant and intransigent than the old leader killed in Israeli and U.S. targeted assassination. sanctions. This is bad news for the U.S. and especially for Israel. U.S. and Israeli strikes killed more than 1,700 Iranian civilians, including 254 children. 3 million Iranians have been displaced from their homes, along with 1 million Lebanese. Add to these numbers the 2 million Palestinians displaced by the genocide in Gaza. 6 million people rendered homeless. Joining me to discuss the war on Iran is a former British diplomat who served for many years in the Middle East, working as a security advisor to the EU Special
causing many deaths. Two delegations in Islamabad. They are not meeting directly, they are meeting indirectly. They are quite big. very optimistic that something will go.
Manzana.
And it's not surprising. It's surprising because they are in the differences in the interests of the United States and of Iran and what Iran's objectives are, which are very poorly understood, I believe, in the United States and poorly understood more generally in the West, how serious they are, the objectives of this war. I mean, in a nutshell, the objectives of Iran are to blow up the existing paradigm. That is a revolution objective, to blow it up completely in order that they can escape, if you like, from the cage in which they've been held for 8 years, of surrounded by U.S. military forces, besieged by tariffs, by restrictions, UN resolutions, political isolation, economic, cultural, boycott. So this is what they are trying to break out. Not the same cage that the countering the air attacks that took place in Baghdad. So, I mean, it's impossible to give precise figures, but I believe that the amount of deaths in Tehran done that, on this basis, Iran could earn a little short of $1 trillion a year. outside of Hormuz, that is a sort of a bend around the peninsula, and behind that are mountains, and they are riddled with caves and emplacements of artillery. So the whole of the Hormuz Strait, you don't need to have drones, missiles. They control it by artillery. It's within range, and that exists right up our border. So any ship trying to go off will be sunk, or damaged and told to leave. And if you land forces on the Iranian side, there will be, how do you get them there? How do you sustain them? How do you resupply them? How do you exfiltrate them? You will land them on Iran. It's desolate, that part of Iran. There are no forests. There are in other parts of Iran, but this is just desolate. And Kok Island is a very small place. It is, even if you landed them on Kok Island, I've been to Kok Island, it is just a small, flat area where the tunnels for the pipelines from inside Iran come and load tankers. If you take it, what is that going to do? And anyway, even if you stop the Iranian oil from flowing to Kok, then all Iran has to do is to close Hormuz for 3-4 weeks. And the pain in terms of oil price, inflation, markets, valuations will be felt very quickly. So it's going to be very hard to see. This is one of the aspects of these negotiations is the United States has very few cards to play and has one huge disadvantage, which is that ultimately, as we saw in terms of Lebanon, the key player in this is not Islamabad, and that is Israel. And Israel overall has been very clear. We're following the Israeli press very closely, the Hebrew press, and their aim in the attack on Lebanon was, first of all, to force more time from Trump in order to continue the attack on Hezbollah. Just to be clear, if a few Hezbollah have been killed in this, there have been hundreds, altogether many more hundreds of casualties of ordinary Lebanese civilians got nothing to do with Hezbollah. They're trying to keep it apart by coming to an arrangement with the Prime Minister of Lebanon. This is a separate issue. We're going to negotiate the disarmament of Hezbollah with them. Therefore, it's not part of the issue. And as I say, the Iranian position is the equation is very clear. The equation is it's a ceasefire on all fronts or it's a ceasefire on none. And that's what they will be saying to the delegation, the American delegation in Islamabad.
Doesn't Israel seek through Lebanon? I mean, Trump initially agreed that ceasefire in Lebanon was part of the deal. Then he had a phone call with Netanyahu and immediately backtracked. I also want to note that when Israel carried out this massive attack, I think over 10 minutes, there was no warning. I think the numbers of civilian dead are up to 2,000. To describe it as a terror attack is probably not far. But it seems that this is Israel's, and you're right, Israel is not in Islamabad, but it was also not a party to the ceasefire agreement brokered by Pakistan. Is this Israel's tool to essentially sabotage any kind of agreement?
Yes. It's very clear that, and from the Hebrew press, it's expressed. For example, Ben David said, well, of course, the attempt now to insist on the disarmament of Hezbollah is likely to provoke a but then adds afterwards, but that's been the aim all along. And similarly, we noticed that, I noticed that, I think it was yesterday, the deadline for the disarmament of Hamas has ended. So if Israel decides to leave Lebanon quiet at the moment, it's just as likely that we're going to see a massive military operation in Gaza or inland in the West Bank. Again, the objective is quite clear when you read the Hebrew press. I mean, and these are these are serious political correspondents. We've been following them for years. We know the ones who are close to the leadership and the ones who are in the opposition, and the ones that are close to the leadership are very clear. And we want the war to continue. And in public opinion, that is also the case. 93% of the Jewish residents in Israel want the war to continue. So this is what is being pursued. How to put pressure on Trump to continue the war because they want Iran destroyed, not just into some sort of agreement on nuclear issues or something. They want it destroyed. They want to set up a whole series of ethno-sectarian mini-states on it. Baluchi state, Kurdish state, Azeri state, whatever, set them at odds with one another and have a completely weakened Iran. So Iran is not going to go back into that paradigm. Why should it? Under any circumstances, they can see that, and now they are in the process of trying to make a strategic push, a shift to change that paradigm and get out of this and to have sanctions lifted. One of the points of the Hormuz exercise is because people are paying tolls, and those tolls are, if you like, breaking the sanctions siege on Iran. And that's the only way you get your tankers out. And increasing states are coming and agreeing and trying to make arrangements with Iran. I mean, including Asian states, particularly Asian states, of course, Iran, India and Pakistan, but also South Korea, Japan. They're all making arrangements to pay the toll and to be able to access energy through Hormuz. So, I mean, it is breaking in a small way, but breaking the sanctions. But they want sanctions lifted completely. And they are using the yuan, the position of the yuan, and also the attempt to tell all of the Gulf states that they have now to abandon their close economic ties with the United States if they want to have a relationship with Iran. And it's not just the American bases, but it's also the Microsoft. That part of the, if you like, the structure that has created an environment, an economic culture of the whole Gulf, which is inimical to Iran.
I know this is a difficult question, but how do you read the Trump administration? Do you think that they are aware of how cornered they are?
I don't think so. I mean, I think this has been a complete misreading, first of all, of the nature of Iran. I think they thought that Iran was a house of cards and was going to collapse. We saw that very clearly from the New York Times account of the 11th of February meeting, which incidentally is only half the story, because we were following in the Hebrew press on the 29th of December, when Netanyahu came and had the summit at Mar-a-Lago with Trump. It was there that he laid down very clearly to Trump. First, we said, forget the nuclear issue. You're not to pursue that. You have to concentrate on the one issue. We have to done, they will be, inviolable. We won't be able to attack them again in the future. So you have to put that as your first priority, and not the nuclear issue. And if you try to get out of this by doing the nuclear issue, Netanyahu told him, quote from many sources in the Hebrew press, we won't give you a kosher certificate for that. We're not going to accept another sort of JCPOA type solution. And if you don't have that, you won't have the support of the right in the United States. So you have to do this, and there has to be this attack on Iran. And according to all of the newspapers, that was agreed in principle on the 29th, again, well before the 11th of February meeting that the New York Times has described. And again, during that, it is clear Trump was convinced this was going to be a very short war, days and most, one weekend. Started on Saturday, and by the time markets open on Monday, the Supreme Leader would be dead, and the whole thing would be moving towards a regime change in Iran. And it very clearly hasn't happened. That, in fact, something quite different is happening. It's very hard to describe this correctly, and I'm not trying to, this isn't wishful thinking on my part, but it's quite clear to me that there is a spirit of the Iranian Revolution in its new form has come back, particularly amongst the young. You can see it when Trump threatened to end the civilization, the Iranian civilization. Everyone streamed out onto the bridges, to the nuclear power station, and said, okay, here we are. If you're going to kill us, you kill us. I mean, this reflects a deep readiness to accept sacrifice, personal sacrifice, in the interests of your community, in the interests of Iran, as a civilization, a symbol of civilization. So there is a powerful, particularly amongst the young people now, they are much more, if you like, fired up after the killing of the Supreme Leader, and much more fired up. And young women, boys, men, it is something that is quite important, and my belief is having an effect, not just in the region, which it is, the success of Iran in this period, but in Russia, and I'm told in China too. The Chinese have been quite, they didn't expect it, Iran, they thought Iran would manage, but they've been quite surprised at the success that Iran has had, and its planning, its thinking, and the, if you like, asymmetric war that they've been planning for 2 decades. So it's having an effect in China and in Russia too.
Just as a footnote, we should add that the Persian civilization is 7,000 years old. It's lasted a lot longer than the American experiment. But does the Trump administration at this point in Islamabad realize that they don't have many options left, that Iran is basically holding all the cards, or do you think that they are foolish enough to get sucked back into a resumption of the war?
I think, first of all, the most important element in this, of course, is Israel, because it is quite likely that Israel will pursue the war. Whether it will do it, first of all, Lebanon, or whether it will do it in Gaza, or whether it will do it directly. But as far as they're concerned, the war is unfinished business. Now, this is a paradox, a real paradox, because at the same time that I'm saying pursue and support war on Iran and the destruction of Iran in the polls, it's even higher average the 93%. At the same time, I'm saying that there's signs of great distress inside Israel too. The chief of staff of the army has said, IDF is on the point of collapsing. He went to the last security cabinet meeting and he said, I've got 10 red lights for you, gentlemen, because we cannot survive with this. We are losing heavily many men in Lebanon. They had nearly in that very short period, they were there, nearly 100 Makov were destroyed.
This is the Israeli battle tank you're referring to.
Yes, sorry, the main battle tank. And many of them with their crew. Some crew got up, many did not. They're losing troops when they tried to invade and form a buffer line in Lebanon. They were routed. There is a new Hezbollah. It has gone dark. You don't see it. The Israelis complain, they're like ghosts. They appear and they vanish and you don't see them again. They've evolved, they've changed it, and they fire their missiles straight across to Tel Aviv. So there's a big fight in Israel because the defense minister wants a buffer line. They want to level all the houses for 7-8 kilometers in the south of Lebanon, just destroy them like Gaza, and have that as a buffer line. And the defense staff say to him, but this is stupid, what are you doing this for? Because Hezbollah has most of its missile capacity north of the Litani. The Litani is a river that divides Lebanon about just less than halfway to the north. And they have north of it. The south has always been seen as more of a Shiite preserve. And so they have, and this is where the crisis is. On the one hand, the population wants the war to go on. On the other hand, the military side in Israel are saying very clearly, we have achieved none of our objectives in Iran. We haven't seen the state collapse. It wasn't a house of cards. We don't believe there can be a color revolution in Iran. We haven't ended the nuclear process. We haven't got the enriched uranium back. We haven't caused any real damage. They still are able to fire missiles at us regularly and with very damaging effects. So we have failed in Iran. And we have failed clearly. We all thought that Hezbollah had been completely decapacitated by the killing of its leadership and Hassan Nasrallah. And now we find that actually they've emerged even more effectively than they were. Very effective new leaders and new structures. And in Gaza, who's running Gaza? It's Hamas still running Gaza. And they are re-equipping and they are re-preparing for another conflict with Iran. So all of this has failed. And there's going to be no grand victory. So there is this great confrontation, and it could be that it is Israel that calls for a ceasefire first, even before, just as they did in the 12-day war, after 4 days started asking for it. So it's possible because the strains on ordinary people, yes, they support the destruction of Iran wholeheartedly, yet they are not ready to go on going down to the shelters and spending every night for 8 or 10 hours in a shelter, day after day after day. And the strains on the civil population are great. So I can't give you a very simple answer of what's going to happen from all of this, but don't forget there are elections coming up. And Netanyahu still has a court case which is about to resume, I think, tomorrow. And he has to win these elections to avoid the outcome of the court case, which might be an imprisonment. And so he's desperate to keep the war in Iran going, because this is, to keep the fantasy saying, look, okay, we haven't won against Hezbollah, but look, we can really hit them. And we hit them. And so it's very complicated, the situation in Israel as a consequence, and very complicated in the United States. I mean, I'm speaking to you from Europe, and you're in the United States, but you will well understand. I mean, the problem is that Trump needs to clear the decks, if he can, before the summer, because the midterm elections are coming. The economic situation could turn very nasty. As I say, within even 3 weeks, the supply line shortages may show up. The price of oil is still high. Price of gasoline is high. And so an economic crisis in the debt market or elsewhere, because we know very clearly that there's been a huge move out of the dollar, people seeking other forms of secure assets at this uncertain time. Certainly, we see that in the Gulf. I mean, much of the money's been moving out of the Gulf, but not back into the dollar. It's been moving into yuan and going to China. And Russia has been pursuing this and telling the Europeans, if you want any Russian oil or gas, you have to pay yuan. And European banks are now giving panda loans. Deutsche Bank, major bank, is now saying, well, we're not giving dollar loans. Now we are issuing bonds, panda bonds in yuan, either a digital one or classical one, and things are changing, and the process geopolitically is shifting, and Iran is gradually, in its small way, emphasizing and working on these rifts in the geopolitical structures to get leverage for their main demand, which is we want the paradigm over. We've had it 48 years of being in a cage, and we're breaking out.
If the ceasefire talks break down, how likely do you think it is that the United States will resume its aerial campaign against Iran?
From what I understand, the Iranians don't think that America is about to resume the war. America, they think Israel is a different case. But they don't think America is likely to resume war because they don't really have any cards to play. Already the Iranians have pushed, the naval assets 1,000 kilometers from the coastline by firing drones as warning and pushing. So the carriers have been pushed beyond the range of their deck strike aircraft to be able to overfly Iran without refueling. And you can't refuel over your target. It's not a advisable thing to do. They pushed that out. They destroyed most of the bases in the Gulf states. Heavy damage. The radar systems being destroyed. Some of the AWACS being disabled. So apart from the ability to just simply blindly bombard basically civil infrastructure, houses, residences, hospitals, and things like that in Tehran and elsewhere, all, by the way, not necessarily by aircraft flying over it, because they largely don't, use the standoff weapons, cruise missiles, and others that are used to do these attacks. So what's really left to the United States militarily to do that would be a game changer? I mean, what bomber game that has, the only thing that is particularly worrying is in this period, Natanz, the nuclear facilities that was bombed in June, was also put into a missile very close to Boucher. And just for your person or viewers are clear about it, Boucher is a working nuclear power plant, which is a joint venture with Russia. So it's half-staffed with Russians, but I think 135 of them has now been withdrawn. But then there was another missile which actually hit Boucher. Not much damage, a little damage. But what's the signal coming from Israel that on the nuclear target? And I think the signal is not so much to Iran, but to the United States.
And what are they saying to the U.S.?
Keep the war up, or else we might decide that we are going to resort to practical nuclear weapons.
Great. Thank you, Alistair. And I want to thank Milena, Sophia, and Max, who produced the show. You can find me at chrishedges.substack.com.
This kind of sentiment is so vulgar and so illegal, by the way, under international law, because countries are not, governments are not to say these things under the UN Charter. They're not even threatened the use of force, much less to use this kind of force.
So, Professor Sachs, you and I are talking right now, minutes after the U.S. president gave a national address on the latest situation regarding the war in Iran. Now, we understand among the facts that he gives, one is the conflict is likely to last 2 to 3 more weeks. What does that mean?
I don't think anything is really in Donald Trump's control. The speech was a lot of bravado. The speech was a lot of delusion, in my view. And during the speech, the price of oil rose $5 a barrel just in the 25 minutes of the speech, meaning the markets did not find any of it very credible. So I think we have to do what we normally have to do with Trump, which is filter these remarks. He said America has won. 2 more weeks of bombing Iran back to the Stone Age, and then it will go home. Okay, he also said that the U.S. isn't going to open the Strait of Hormuz. Very interesting. They can't. So if the U.S. has won so decisively, why is that little fact left there? Well, I think basically we have a speech with no credibility by a president with no credibility.
Now, Professor Sachs, let's go on to another question that pretty much being mentioned. The U.S. president argued that the U.S. does not need oil coming from the Strait of Hormuz. That's not a concern of the United States because the U.S. pretty much can depend on its own oil. Is that true? And how much is U.S. likely to be impacted, economically speaking, by the ongoing conflict?
Well, Americans pay the same price of oil as everybody else. There's a world market for oil. Given that there's a world shortage, the price of oil and all its derivative products and fertilizer and petrochemicals is soaring in the United States. Americans are, of course, feeling it the same way as everybody else. It may be true that some of our oil companies are making a fortune. Some of Trump's friends may be making a fortune, but the American people are suffering along with everybody else. His approval rating is plummeting, and it will continue to plummet. He's a first-class fool as far as I'm concerned.
Professor, so you are suggesting that, yes, indeed, the U.S. does not depend on oil coming from Iran or the Strait of Hormuz directly. However, the inflation is a problem for the United States, given the fact that the Strait of Hormuz is for all kinds of supply chains around the world. Of course, that's supporting the U.S. consumers. Is that your argument?
Well, that's the fact that there's been a decline, a very significant decline of the supply of oil on world markets.
Yeah.
American companies are part of that world supply. When Americans buy oil, they're buying oil in an integrated world market. If you look at the price in West Texas, which is our benchmark, and the price of oil in the so-called Brent European pricing, they're basically the same. Not exactly, but they're in one market.
Yeah.
I don't know if Trump understands any of this, but Americans understand it every moment. They're suffering from a global energy supply side shock that will cause the United States and the rest of the world to have a very, very serious economic contraction.
Right. We also noticed that the U.S. leader in the national address, which is, shall we say, the first one of such kind since the conflict began, compared this latest conflict or war to some of the earlier conflicts and wars. He compared that to World War I, II, Korea War, Vietnam War, Iraq War, and suggests it's only 32 days compared to years of wars in the earlier cases. Now, your take on that?
Well, it all depends on how long it takes to destroy things. We're very efficient at destroying things right now. The next 2 weeks could destroy a lot of the energy supplies in the Middle East, in which case Mr. Trump's argument isn't going to mean very much. 2 or 3 weeks, we could see the oil and the gas supplies, the pipelines, the refineries, the gas fields, the energy grids blown up across the region. Trump has threatened again tonight to blow up the energy infrastructure of Iran. Despite his claims, Iran can readily hit the neighbors, and it has ample missiles, probably thousands, to hit the neighbors and to hit Israel, by the way. So there's a lot of bravado. He cannot process anything other than complete bravado and declarations of ultimate might and ultimate victory. I don't think what we hear tonight is anything about facts. What we hear is spin. What we hear is Trump's state of mind. We heard basically the U.S. will not open the Strait of Hormuz, and there will be several more weeks of war. And during that period, the amount of damage that can be done to the world economy and to the Middle East countries is vast. If sensitive targets are hit, and I expect that they will be hit in Iran, Iran will retaliate, and we will read tomorrow or the next day about the unprecedented damage to the Emirates or to Saudi Arabia or to another country across the Gulf. And so we should understand that's why the markets gave a thumbs down within minutes of Trump's remarks. They did not find it credible. I do not find any of it credible. Bravado is not the same thing as truth.
Right. It's not fair if we don't mention the other side of the conflict in this latest war. Of course, we also hear in the news with a so-called open letter by the current Iranian president, Pezeshkian. He, in an open letter, questioned whether the United States truly pursues so-called an American first policy or merely acts as a proxy for Israel. Also, in that same letter, he talked about the Israel, and he talked about Iran is in no way thinking about harming the United States, which has been the arguments the U.S. politicians made. One of the reasons why this war needs to happen. Now, your immediate takeaway on that as well.
I'm afraid he probably underestimates how violent the United States actually is. Because for the last 2 years at these meetings at the United Nations, he's been saying, we want peace, we want negotiation. His country's leaders in return have been murdered by Israel and the United States. So I feel sad because this is a letter saying to the American people, we have no animus against you. We don't like to be attacked by your government. But the fact of the matter is that the United States leadership and Israel's leadership are out to kill and destroy as much of Iran as possible. The president said in his speech that they would destroy Iran and bring it back to the Stone Age. This kind of sentiment is so vulgar and so illegal, by the way, under international law, because governments are not to say these things under the UN Charter. They're not even to threaten the use of force, much less to use this kind of force.
So let's move on to some of the key questions related to the latest conflict and war. And what does that mean both for the United States, Iran, and also for the rest of the world? One of the things is the key, the Strait of Hormuz. Now, we've seen several occasions, Professor Sachs, that the U.S. president suggested it is not the U.S. goal to control the Strait of Hormuz or to occupy the Strait of Hormuz, including this time in the national address. So what would that mean for the others? How is that going to reconcile with the earlier news leaking out suggesting the U.S. will have the option of taking over the Kart Island and also control the Strait of Hormuz?
So what he says is not dispositive of what the United States is going to do. All we can say is the following. If the U.S. government has decided that it's not an objective to open the Strait of Hormuz, it will remain under Iranian control. It will remain essentially closed. Whatever bombing they do in the next 2 or 3 weeks and whatever reciprocal response Iran gives will not open the Strait of Hormuz. And what it would mean if Trump is reflecting true American policy, which I have to caution again, but if he is, what it means is we are in for a completely massive global economic crisis at the hands of Israel and the United States. That's the bottom line. That's why the oil prices jumped within minutes of Trump's opening remarks as soon as he said what he said.
Right.
The Strait will close. What is not going to happen is Europeans or the Emirates or the Saudis opening the Strait of Hormuz. It's not within their power, period. Iran is on the other side. It can shell the tankers, and it is ready to sink the tankers that try to go through. And that's been seen since the start of this operation. It was the single most predictable point of this operation from the very beginning.
The other thing is regarding the Strait of Hormuz, because it is in everybody's interests, and therefore, what are likely to be the impacts of this if the Strait of Hormuz continue to be closed, or if the Strait of Hormuz is going to be choked either by the United States or by Iran for the others, Professor Sachs?
It won't be choked by the United States. It will be closed by Iran as Iran fights for its survival. That's what will happen. And if that happens, there will be a worldwide economic crisis. But given that, what's also true and important to understand is if this war goes on even for weeks, there will be so much destruction of the oil and gas fields and infrastructure that it won't be the Strait of Hormuz essentially that's at issue. It will be the physical production in the Middle East that will be at issue. In other words, we are going to have a major energy supply reduction. Trump's speech tonight, again, if it can be taken at its word, has essentially made clear there will be a phenomenally sharp, probably unprecedented energy crisis. And that we have every reason to expect will create a worldwide economic crisis.
Professor, about the oil prices, we have seen the Brent price going up to 150 US, which is the highest, even higher than the first Gulf War. Meanwhile, we also see countries, particularly developing and emerging economies, cannot afford to have large storage. Some of them even purchase oil on a daily basis. So what kind of disaster we're likely to see for humans on this earth?
We've seen oil supply shocks twice in the 1970s, and the effects were extremely negative, very severe, sharp declines of living standards, food supply disruptions, and this will be no exception. There will be a lot of suffering by people all over the world, care of Israel and the United States. This is what is underway. I heard nothing in the speech that gave me much solace about this. The bravado that 2 or 3 weeks more, we bomb them to the Stone Age and it's over, and we go home and others can clean up our mess, is not a cogent approach to what is a very deep crisis. Given, I should add something that may seem a little subtle or beside the point, but it could be very serious. There are projections that the weather in the second half of this year, especially, I mean the climate, because of the possible serious El Nino, which is hugely disruptive of food supplies, of rainfall patterns, and drought.
Right.
If that comes and compounds this, we will have an absolutely unprecedented crisis on our hands.
Right.
So the IMF is already giving reports of this. The International Energy Agency has said that the extent of the energy supply shock is unprecedented. We heard nothing tonight of any intelligent response to this, not even a concern of it, frankly.
Related to that, we've been hearing an orchestra of different voices coming from the region and also from other parts of the world whose interests obviously are directly impacted. We've been hearing from the Gulf states. Some have been calling on the United States and Israel to go all the way, so to speak, while others have been expressing concerns about the latest situations, especially the impacts on the region now and in the future. Meanwhile, we've also been hearing from some European governments talking about this is, quote, not their wars, and therefore they are not going to be involved. Some of them refuse to open the airspace for the U.S. and
in the Stone Age. That is their claim. There is another very widespread view that Iran has thousands of missiles and much greater numbers of drones, that it has not been seriously degraded. The U.S. position is that the enriched uranium is buried under the ground and monitored by U.S. satellite, and no issue there. Many other people think this is completely preposterous, that the Iranians, even before the attack last summer, removed the enriched uranium to new locations. And I don't know, because I'm not in the information chain, but I can say that a lot of the issues that we're discussing depend on the military assessment. Stepping back, I can only make a couple of general points, which I would like to make. First, I have never known the U.S. government to tell the truth about the military situation during my lifetime, whether it is Vietnam or whether it is any of the other wars. So I don't believe a word that is said until it's shown. I do not take the word is that aerial attacks are not sufficient, especially for a country of nearly 100 million people and a land area which is enormous and mountainous and protected, and a regime that has known all along that it has two great enemies, the United States and Israel. It has not been the case that a few weeks of bombing has ever ended a war like this. So on general principles, though I am not any kind of definitive expert and I have zero inside information on this, I do not believe the U.S. narrative. And many of the things that we're discussing will come down to who is right and wrong about the military situation. I think it is likely that Iran has very substantial military power, missile systems, hypersonic missile systems, the ability to cause grave damage across the Gulf and in Israel. And the U.S. claim that this is not the case will be proven to be false. If that is right, we are in a completely new world situation. If that conclusion is correct, if the United States is right in what President Trump said, then Iran will have been brutally subjected to aggression, but it will not change fundamentally the world balance. So, unfortunately, there is no answer right now that is clear. I believe that the weight of the evidence right now is that Trump is blowing a lot of hot air, and as usual, the United States government is not being straightforward about the real situation.
I'm very pleased for this inaugural edition of our video podcast to have with us Zhao Hai joining us online from Beijing. He is Director of International Political Studies at the National Institute for Global Strategy. Zhao Hai, so good to have you on the show. It's always a great pleasure to have discussions with you on these important topics.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah. Well, I remember we started, talking to each other about these issues during Trump's first term, right? That's how everything kind of got heated up, and now what a time we're living in. So many things have happened, and the very latest, and the reason why we're doing this podcast is oil prices. As we know, oil prices have surpassed $100 a barrel on Monday. Actually, at one time it went up to about $120 a barrel. And there is great nervousness in the international markets. Asian stock markets, for instance, really suffered a very heavy losing day today across the world. And prospects are looking pretty bleak as several OPEC countries in the region, such as Iraq, such as Kuwait and UAE, have all announced that they're going to reduce production because their crude oil cannot be shipped through the Hormuz, and they don't have enough storage capacity being such small countries in size. So some people are saying this is probably the most serious stoppage in supply of global petroleum production, and if it lasts for weeks, this is going to trigger a global shockwave, possibly trigger a global economic crisis. What is your take? How serious the situation is?
I agree. I think if the situation lasts more than, let's say, 3 weeks, the situation will get much more bleak and much more dangerous to the global economy. We're facing an abyss that if we jump over this, I think the global economy will fall into not just perhaps recession, but it's likely we're going through some sort of depression. Because it's the Hormuz is actually modern world economy's artery, and if you cut that artery, the blood stops flowing. And I think it's quite obvious to everybody, and particularly for the people from East Asia, knowing that if their energy supply stopped, then everything stops, because our modern economy is based upon oil and natural gas, and actually natural gas is getting increasingly important for modern economy around the globe. And also, I think the stopped floating the oil, shipping out of the region, but also the storage is full. And they're shutting down or rolling back the production is precisely because there's no place to put the oil if you drill the oil and gas down from the ground. And that capacity is very quickly filled up and very quickly reaching capacity. So that's why I think in the coming days and then a couple of weeks, we will see a very dire situation. Of course, there's extra capacity around the world in other places. They might increase production and capacity, but in a very short period of time, that cannot replace Middle East oil. And that involves very complex rerouting of oil and natural gas around the world. That is not on the same level of when the Ukraine crisis happened, because Russian oil has its pipeline going to the west, to Europe, but also pipeline going to the east. So, and if you cut some of the Russian oil gas out of the market, Middle East can quickly ramp up its production to fill some of the gap, and the U.S. also has extra capacity. So at this point, I think we're seeing at a very different level of geopolitical incident that is much bigger than the previous geopolitical crisis.
Well, you mentioned the Ukraine crisis. Actually, there are some studies which estimate that the estimated total hit on oil flows from the Persian Gulf states is 17 times larger than the peak April 2022 hit to Russia oil production. Would you agree with such a gloomy estimation?
I think that's pretty much in the ballpark. Well, first of all, if you look at globals, the oil export to the overall global consumption for crude oil is about 27%. For gas, it's about 20%. So if you cut that off, that means at least 1/5 of global supply is missing. Russian oil is different because even if with all the sanctions, there's multiple ways that Russia can ship its oil, and also there's a lot of people that can receive and transport Russian oil. That is very different from you cut off a main artery, again, a main artery of oil and gas coming out of the Gulf region. That's number one. And number two, remember this, the Gulf oil and gas has specific quality because, oil and gas, and particularly oil, crude oil, coming out of different regions of the world have a different composition. And the Middle Eastern oil is particularly fitted towards East Asia and Asia in general, which is 80% of the Middle East oil consumption, and the other 20% goes to Europe. So even if you find alternatives, it's very unlikely that your refineries can quickly adjust to, you need to spend a lot of time to remodel and to get all those oils refined. So again, this is a very big disruption of the global energy infrastructure that cannot be easily fixed in a very short period of time. So, of course, the price shooting up around the globe, it's the natural outcome of this geopolitical incident.
Well, Iran has warned that oil prices could hit $200 in the near future. Do you think that is a realistic estimation, or is it just, a threat to intimidate people and probably pressure the United States to alter policy?
In the extreme scenario, it's possible because later on, if this war continued to indefinite, sort of no end in sight, then we will have a non-linear increase of oil price. It's not going to increase bit by bit. It's just like it's going to happen like today and last weekend. The oil price is just going to shoot up. And if we look at previous comparable cases, for instance, 20 years ago, there's the theory that the world will run out of oil. And after the financial crisis, and when the U.S. opened up the monetary policy of pumping money into the market, there's a very short period when oil price shooting up, even up to like $150 per barrel. So back then, it's a financial phenomenon or a sort of concern about supply and demand. Now it's a short shock. And in that shock, if the people who are seeking oil on the margin cannot find the oil, then the price will adjust accordingly. So it's not going to be staying at 100 or 120. It's very much likely that it's going to go up very quickly. However, again, when the price is a mechanism to adjust supply and demand. If we really go to 200, then a lot of demand will be depressed. Again, the whole economy will shrink accordingly to adjust to this new reality, and we will see a lot of economic hurt.
How fit is the global economy at this juncture to weather such a potential shock?
I think
We're talking about
yeah.
the global economy, of course.